So very quickly, before I introduce the panellists, I'll just tell you a little bit about Never More Needed. Never More Needed is a UK-wide voluntary sector campaign that aims to raise awareness of all the amazing work that the voluntary sector is doing to support people during COVID-19. We want to highlight the great need within our communities for a strong and capable voluntary sector now and in the future. SCVO will be doing this by reporting on a lot of the work going on across Scotland to support people with COVID-19 through COVID-19, and we'll also be holding live events like this one. This is our very first Never More Needed live event, so I'm looking forward to some good chat. And without more ado, I'll introduce our panellists. We have Aileen Campbell, Scotland's Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government, and Anna Fowlie, Chief Executive of the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. This is a very busy time for everyone, so thank you very much for taking the time to join us. And if we would like to kick off with the Cabinet Secretary, maybe talking for a few minutes about her impressions of how the voluntary sector has responded to COVID-19 over the last few months.
Okay, thanks Susan, and thanks to everybody involved in the setting up of the webinar. I'm using my phone. My computer wasn't kind of enabling me to use Zoom, so if it looks like I'm kind of tapping on you, it's just more to try and make sure I can keep tabs on what the chat is on the chat function. But anyway, so thank you. It's nice to be with you, and I hope everyone's safe and well. I don't want to kind of say an awful lot, but I think from my perspective as the Cabinet Secretary responsible for the third sector and the voluntary sector, over the last few weeks and months when the country's had to respond to the pandemic, unprecedented situation that we found ourselves in, it has been absolutely inspiring to see the way in which the third sector has kicked into action, and the community responds, the third sector responds, the charitable organisations, how they have been crucial to shore up the resilience of our communities and the country more generally. And I think that's reflected in the fact that very early we identified as a government that we needed to put resource in. So it wasn't just about shoring up businesses and putting in business packages to help our economy. It was also about making sure that we put in resource there to support the community effort in the third sector as well. Now, of course, there's going to be arguments about whether it's enough or whatever, but I think quite quickly we understood that it was going to be important to make sure that the third sector and our communities were supported. And I think effectively funding things that we already know, that if you support communities, if you give them the resource, if you give them the freedom and the trust to do what they do best, then they can go on and deliver good things. And the same way we supported the third sector, we know that you are agile, you're responsive, and you're fleet of foot, and that's what was needed to respond to the pandemic, and is still required as well. I'm kind of conscious that maybe sometimes we're talking about things as if in the past. We're still living through that crisis response. There are still people going hungry, there are still people going to food banks, there are still people getting support through the Scottish Welfare Fund, there are still people in dire straits. Now we're starting to kind of ease off. The First Minister's not long finished her statement. We're starting to ease off some of those restrictions. But what's, I think, absolutely critical is for us to recognise that we're not going back to what was there before the lockdown. We're having to evolve and adapt and make sure that we continue to support the most vulnerable communities, but also try and work within the confines of what how the virus is spreading. So we're going to need to think critically as well about how do we move forward and how do we sustain support over a longer period of time and not just be solely focused on a crisis response. And again, that's going to be where these conversations are going to be absolutely critical. It's going to be shaped, the approach is going to have to be shaped by what you're experiencing in the front line, about what you're seeing that we need to do. And it's also about how do we capture some of the good stuff that's going on as well. There's been an enormous amount of good things happening. So the pandemic has been awful, it's been tragic, and it's been devastating. But it's actually forced a lot of people to work together, disrespect professional boundaries, roll the sleeves up, focus on what's needed, and deliver some really positive outcomes in the process. And we don't want to go back to the old ways of working. So I think as we kind of move forward into the recovery phase and into then the renewal phase, I think what we also need to do is, while we try and seek to adapt to try and respond to the emerging needs of our communities and the country more generally, we also need to think about how do we rethink some of the things that we've been doing from the past, and how do we not slip back into the old ways of doing things? How do we keep the partnership, the collaboration, the agility going, and how do we, I suppose, more from my perspective, I think, need to recognise the importance of the third sector as a key strategic partner in terms of helping our communities survive and thrive, which is going to be critical for the recovery phase of the country. So from my perspective, what I've seen has been absolutely phenomenal. I've seen it in my own town that I stay in, the constituency more generally, but right across the country, the response of the third sector has been incredible. And the partnership working we've seen has been phenomenal. We have managed to achieve things that we probably never thought we would have achieved. We've managed to effectively get most of the people who were rough sleeping off the streets and into some form of safety. Now, we've been struggling and vexing over that for a long time, and now suddenly the pandemic has forced some of these good social policy gains. So how do we keep that and all of those things that have been positive move forward, and how do we rethink and reform and renew our society as well? Because I don't think anyone has a desire to go back to the old things. In fact, the pandemic has shown how unequal our society has become, and how we need to try and think about things in a bit of a different way in order that we can really try and create the fairer Scotland that I think we all want to see happen. So for me, that's going to have to include the third sector and your voice to help guide government's actions going forward, not just over the crisis, but over the longer term as well. And how do we set ourselves in the right trajectory to achieve some of those things? And I think these conversations are going to be absolutely crucial. So I'll leave it there, and hopefully we get some good questions and thoughts and ideas.
Thank you very much. That's a great overview. I think you're going to get a lot of those questions reflected right back at you as we go through this event. But yeah, I think we all recognise what an amazing job the voluntary sector has done over the last few months. But I'm wondering whether either of you have thought about areas where the voluntary sector could have been doing more, and if you can think of ways that it could have been supported to do more.
And I suppose that'll come back over, no doubt, when we get to a point when we can reflect over things a bit more carefully. I mean, I think, again, the word that's been used so much over the last wee while has been unprecedented. I've been in government, I suppose, since 2011. This is like nothing we've ever faced. We were putting in a lot of preparation to cope with a no-deal Brexit if we crashed out of Europe. We're putting in lots of resilience planning to try and think through how we cope with that. But this is on another level, and so everyone has been trying to do their best and have been guided by what they thought was the best. And no doubt looking back, there'll be things that we maybe think, oh, we could have done that a bit differently. But actually, I'm pretty pleased the way in which, the speed of which government had to work, local government, the third sector, how everyone came together. Now, there'll be things around the edges that folk will have been frustrated about, but in all honesty, I think folk have done a remarkable job. The things that we have asked of partners, the things that we have asked of our community, they have delivered extraordinary things across the last couple of months. Now, there could be things that we could have done differently. There are things that local government will say to us that we've engaged with the third sector, and they kind of maybe feel that they might have had a bit more of a local response. There's lots of things that we probably would have done differently, but I think on the whole, what we should focus on is what's been good. How do we keep the good stuff? How do we use that to build from in the future? And there's no doubt policy issues and all the rest of it in amongst that, but I think generally, I think what's happened has been pretty remarkable, and that's, in some respects, it's been easier for us in government to provide the resource because a lot of people in the front line have been delivering that, and that's been the hard stuff.
So yeah, I would agree with that. I think that that we should focus on the positives, and I think even with hindsight, I don't know if there's more that can be done. I think there obviously will be. We'll unpick it all, and some of the work that you're doing on Never More Needed, Susan, will also examine some of that. We may have chosen to do things differently, but no one's ever dealt with anything like this before. I think what we need to focus now on is looking at that sustainability of the sector and getting involved, as the Cabinet Secretary said earlier, in the conversations about recovery and renewal. which isn't just about immediate response. It's very, very easy to be stuck in immediate response because we are still in that, but there are, the sector as a whole has got a huge contribution to make to recovery, and that's not just those that are providing immediate services, it's everyone that we do, you know, the huge range of things that the sector does. So a presence in the recovery discussions and a focus on the sustainability of the whole sector, not just on those providing immediate response, I think would be.
Yeah, I think we recognise, or a lot of us recognise, that we're really very much still at the start of this situation. And that COVID-19 has highlighted so many challenges for our society, for our economy, that have led to, at the moment, very, very local responses. And I'm wondering whether there's things that either of you have learned over the last few months that could help us create better communities that better meet the needs of people for things like care, food, health and well-being, things that have perhaps not always been a big priority for our society.
Absolutely. I guess, though, for me as the minister in the government responsible for some of those things, I think there has been a collective recognition across the whole government more widely that a lot of the stuff was sitting in my portfolio and we just needed to let it happen. So communities have been chapping at the bit to be doing more, to be given the trust, to be given the tools in order to deliver responses in their community for different challenges that they face. And I think the big lesson from the pandemic has been that when we've enabled some of the community just to do the stuff that they want to do, that they know they need to do, then a lot of that has been far more positive and delivers far more positive outcomes than any manufactured kind of response that could have happened from whether it's national, local government or whatever. Some of the really, really localised community responses has been remarkable. I see that in my town and the way they've mobilised. So I think there's lots of good lessons that we can think through from that about how does this then translate into the areas that we were trying to look at before the pandemic, whether that was Democracy Matters and the local governance review, whether that's been around housing up to 2040, whether that's been, you mentioned social care, which has been on the spotlight as well. Now, I know that there's been times in my constituency where people have been really frustrated that they themselves couldn't find a way for them to look after the old people in their own community. And now there's maybe a chance for us to think, well, do you know what? Maybe there's a way in which we need to kind of collectively work through, recognise all of the skills and assets that we have, whether you're national government, local government, third sector, the community. There's a way for us to try and work through these things much more collectively, these challenges, in a way that possibly hadn't happened before, or did happen, but maybe not with the speed and the pace that it required of it. So there's massive lessons, and I think that's where this is exciting territory. They're a new phase. What do we want our society to look like, and how do we kind of fast forward that in a way that we've all kind of known needs to happen, but it's been kind of brought down and bureaucracy and red tape and procedures and all the rest of it. When there's been a chance for folk just to roll the sleeves up, get on with it, we've seen lots of great things happen. And I think for me, that's the big gain that we need to build from.
Yeah, I think that's right. We've talked about this before, Cabinet Secretary, that it's the kind of what we're seeing as community empowerment in action. It's actually happening just now. And some of the barriers that have traditionally been claimed aren't, you know, quite such barriers as they seem to have been. So we need to hang on to some of that, as you've said, and also recognise, I think what it's made is it's made the contribution of the sector much more visible. So whether it is things like social care, or whether it's things like youth work and working with young people, where sometimes that's been filling a gap in statutory services, but more often it's actually about a response that's much more appropriate, much more agile, much more community based. And that's, I'm worried about losing some of that. That's again thinking about what we're focusing on the immediate. How do we make sure all those other things are in place in a way that's thriving when we come out the other end of this?
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is as well is to recognise, and what we'll all need to be, and we were always mindful of this, about whether or not the communities that have responded quickest and fastest have had the capacity to do that, and how we kind of balance that up and make sure that we do some of those, use those skills around CLD youth work to build up the capacity in areas that maybe haven't quite had that ability to respond as quickly as others, and not leave communities behind. And where you see brilliant examples of that in place, then we've seen them flourish. You know, I have seen countless communities where with the right support and with the right effort, they've been able to recognise within themselves what they can do themselves. And so we need to make sure that that's part and parcel of the recovery as well, that we don't leave many more folk behind. And especially when the pandemic has had the pretty dismal impact on areas that have higher levels of deprivation and whatever, then that's a big issue we need to grapple with. And we don't lose it. We don't get it kind of bogged down in red tape.
Yeah, and I know Susan's anxious to move on to the questions that are coming in, but just one thing to say on that, I think the only way that works is if it's supported by local government. And what we see, as you're more than aware, is very patchy, that's very patchy across the country. So in some council areas it works really, really well, and in others there's quite a long way to go.
Yeah, although it's interesting too, like that there has been a remarkable response from local government, and maybe it's kind of managed to kind of assert itself and find its confidence about what its role is in all of this too, and but what I think they maybe need support with is to tell their story. And it's good that everyone kind of mobilises on 8 o'clock on a Thursday to clap for the NHS. That is brilliant, but the show's still on the road because a lot of the local government workers and the local government effort, which is often sort of behind the scenes. So I think that maybe goes back into that wider governance and local governance review territory as well. You know, maybe it's just a rethink across the whole piece about if local government is able to feel confident and reassured of its position and its worth and it's respected in that way, then hopefully we can then all come together, not feel that there's anybody trying to step on anyone's toes. Everyone has a part to play in the renewal and recovery of the country, and local government's got a big part to play. But you're right, there is 32 different varieties, and maybe a bit like the communities, we need to maybe then just work positively with the local authorities to see that it's in their benefit to support their communities. And I think a lot of them want to. It's maybe just feeling that confidence, and I think that's a big discussion and a big bonus if we can get it right.
Yep. I'm going to jump in and push on with some of the questions. Unsurprisingly, we've had quite a lot of questions about funding, so I'm going to try and gather that all together. I see we've had one question that has been upvoted 6 times from Katie Docherty, which is about funding, and we had a similar one submitted in advance, also from Maureen Watson at Scottish Mentoring Network and Rob Murray at Cancer Support Scotland. And essentially what they're looking for is any information that you can provide or reassurances you can provide for organisations who are not currently able to access the current funding streams, but will be essential in the recovery in Scotland's recovery to COVID-19. And to what extent you're thinking about how to support these organisations, many of which are really struggling to stay afloat at the moment.
And these are organisations that haven't been able to get access to the funds to date. Yeah, I think.
Yes, they may be organisations that are not actually providing emergency crisis response, but will still be there necessary to pick up the pieces as people recover from this. For example, one of the organisations is Scouts Scotland, and the Scottish Mentoring Network, and the Scottish Urban Regeneration Forum. These are the kinds of organisations that have put the question.
Okay, and again, absolutely, and I think this is maybe kind of falls back into kind of some of the situations that we had beforehand, where while I had the very explicit title of the third sector minister, that actually there's lots of portfolios across government that also require the third sector to be delivering the services. And I think that's the challenge for me now, is to make sure that across government that we not just look to my portfolio and say that's our response to the third sector, but how do we collectively as a government respond to the challenges and the vulnerabilities that our wider the wider third sector is facing. So we went into action pretty quickly. We got the £350 million funding stream set up. That's just supported a lot of organisations and a lot of groups, possibly some of those that are the most vulnerable. But then there's still that big question is how do we then enable us to recover through that and have those organisations in place? And that will require us to think carefully about the funding and the support that's there. And it will require us to work carefully with those organisations and groups, and it will require more than me to be involved in those conversations as well. So I think that's what my job is to do, is to make sure that the rest of the government and the rest of my colleagues have those conversations, make sure that people are reassured and given support, and that there's in place those kind of those ways in which people can get in touch and have dialogue with government, and in order for them to be and feel reassured that they're not falling off the radar because they're not given some kind of immediate crisis response to the pandemic, but actually they're going to be pretty critical to the recovery. So I think it will come down to the conversations, the relationships, and me making sure that I make the case across the rest of government for people to feel reassured from the portfolio perspective that they have. I think it's interesting that you raised the Scouts though, because my wee boys in the Cubs. And the Cubs locally here have been remarkable in keeping all the folk and members engaged. So they have been pretty critical to the well-being of young people in the here and now. So I hope people are telling their own story as good, as positively as they can, because for me the Cubs have been really important to my wee boy and his well-being, keeping him connected, setting him challenges and tasks, and that's been as critical as anything else as well. So perhaps it's about us making sure that the story is as positively told as well, so that folk don't just think because it's the uniform group and you have to meet in person that you're actually not entitled to some of the support in the here and now. So I'm happy to take that as an action with some of the groups that are getting in touch with you.
Great, thank you very, very much. I think that kind of automatically leads on to one of the next questions that's been submitted from Stephen Marrick at Evaluation Support Scotland. And Alistair Hunter for Be More Human also asked a very similar question, which is, what do you as government need from the voluntary sector right now in order to, what do you need to know about the sector's impact, and what will be most helpful for you to ensure that the sector is supported to help the country recover in the future?
Well, I think a lot of the work that's been put in place beforehand was the right place for us to be in, and that there was a lot of effort. I know that well, I see Anna's on my screen there. Anna had been working really hard about trying to make sure that people understood that the third sector more generally touched everybody's life at some point in time, and that if it wasn't there, we'd all miss it. So we need to. So I think that was already a good place to start, in that we were seeing the start of the story being told as positively as it could be, to try and build up that, and to recognise that for government, if we want to achieve the national performance framework outcomes, then we need the third sector. And I guess maybe this is the start then of that kind of that process in a bit more of a kind of compressed bit of time. How do we do that pretty quickly, so that when all the government ministers are thinking about the recovery in their own areas, that we don't miss out the third sector, and that because things are locked down, that people's conversations aren't happening as quickly or as openly, or people aren't bumping into one another as regularly, that we don't miss that out. So I think I'd be keen to make sure that we are under the noses of everybody who's making decisions in the here and now, whether that's my colleagues or whether that's at local government level as well. So I think it's about making sure that we have confidence in the stuff that had been there before, and that was national performance framework and the positive impact that the third sector can make to people's lives, and how we can only achieve that through working together with the third sector. And I think if we can maybe continue this conversation and make sure that we get it nailed about what you bring, then that will be essential.
And I do have something to add.
Sorry.
No, I don't, not particularly. I just totally agree that it's something that I think we've been trying to work on for a while, because as the Cabinet Secretary said, she's one voice in a cabinet with lots of different portfolios of interest. So if we can provide evidence that supports those discussions, her in those discussions, then that's a good thing. But also to hold those discussions elsewhere. So there's many places where recovery and renewal is being talked about. If we need to get the third sector voice in there, and I'm really conscious of the fact that very few people would ever talk about the public sector voice or the private sector voice. They would talk about education or health, or they would talk about retail or construction, whereas we tend to be treated as one homogenous group, and we're not. So it's about how we explain that diversity without it becoming so complicated that nobody can understand it. That I think is a trick that we'll need to master. But I also think this is another example where never more needed will be really, really useful, Susan.
I mean, it was interesting, like Anna's involved with the Scottish Leaders Forum as well, and we sat through a really remarkable presentation from the SFA. So, and they were, so who would have thought it? Football's always in the press for the wrong reasons, but actually in terms of football trying to align itself to the national performance framework, they've done a remarkable job. They've shifted their focus. They have been, in doing so, they've been recognised by UEFA. So they've got international recognition for the work that they're doing locally, and how they've managed to quantify it in some sense, about the impact that they're delivering in the communities at all different levels and for all different ages and stages. And that was something that I know when I was in the sports brief that a lot of the governing bodies were starting to do, but the SFA have done a really remarkable job. Scottish Athletics, they've all done that really, really well. And maybe there's something to learn from that as well, about how they have sharpened up their narrative and their story, just to kind of illustrate what they're delivering, and in doing so have managed to find the granularity of it all, which I think is the important point that Anna makes, that I've got the third sector in my portfolio, but that's just so vast that it's really does it a disservice just to have it sitting in one portfolio explicitly. But we can articulate for you to make sure that we are getting that point made across the rest of government. But we need to do it together, I think.
Great. We've got quite a lot. We've got quite a lot of questions that have been submitted about the voluntary sector's role in recovery, from organisations working in conservation and nature, from sports organisations, from youth groups, and across the whole sector. And I know it's difficult, but to answer really, but what are your impressions about how important the voluntary sector is going to be to people's recovery, and how do you think the Scottish Government can help support the sector in that way?
Well, I think the third sector is going to be the third. I know we've just talked about not calling you the third sector. There's a bit. It's going to be absolutely critical. We're having to deal with some pretty lousy stuff as well. And amongst the positives, there are still folk that are needing to be helped access food. There are folk that are struggling with their heating bills. Folk suffering from domestic abuse. There's countless other marginalised groups that we're still having to help. We're still in a sense lockdown, and that's going to ease off a bit, but bit by bit and gradually. But there's still going to be people who, if they contracted kind of the virus, will have to isolate for 7 days, 14 days, whatever. There are still people who are going to be living with difficulty, and there's still going to be people who have health issues that are going to have to kind of try and cope in a world where there's still the virus present. So it's not going to make things aren't going to be easy. And when you look at the response to the crisis, when I look at my own constituency, who's been there to try and join up the dots a bit? It has been largely the third sector, the community organisations that have been those bits that have bridged between an individual in the statutory service or an individual in a business or whatever to try and access food. It's been them that have been the ones that have been fleet of foot to try and get things in place. And so that's not going to change anytime soon. The context might change, the the restrictions might ease a bit, but there's still going to be difficulty there and challenging for people, and those people will be, that will feel it most, will be those that are currently most marginalised. There will be other issues arising. There will be people who are in universal credit that have never been on universal credit before, that will not have known how to navigate a benefits system, that will have had a 5-week wait until they get their benefits, that will have dipped into their savings at best, or racked up debt. If we come into winter and this is still, you know, having an impact on how we live our lives, there's going to be massive issues around fuel poverty as well. So there are going to be things that over the course of the year that we're going to need to work together on, because people will still require.
Thanks very much. Cheers.
And in terms of recovery, how we rebuild and how we renew, then some of the themes that we're starting to see emerging have been themes that you've been banging the drum for a long time, whether that's about more localised economies, different procurement methods, trust in the third sector, having parity of esteem with other statutory services and organisations, making sure that we respect our communities. So these are things that I think now have much more credence and people are listening to a bit more carefully than they might have done in the past. So it's going to be critical in terms of response to help individuals, but it's going to be about how we reset how our society operates a bit more as well. And I think there's an appetite for that change. And the third sector have been talking about this for long and weary. And I think the time has come now for this to be the kind of trajectory that we put ourselves on.
Great. I'm going to ask you one of the submitted questions now that's been upvoted by 7 people. It's from Eddie McConnell. He says, the focus on the positive is understood, but an authentic process of recovery and renewal requires us to hold difficult conversations with some communities who have felt less valued, less visible, and more isolated by COVID-19. How will their voices be heard? This question's also been submitted by Carnegie, really, in terms of how will individuals and marginalised groups be involved in the recovery?
Yeah, so part of that will be down to you guys. I mean, your guys are the ones that you're often working with the marginalised groups, and you're often working with people who have these vulnerabilities. So about a big part of that will be about you being mindful about how you feed that in, that experience and that intel and that expertise into our work. A lot of that's down to us as well. So I know that we've already, and I have already, and my colleagues have, I know that Christina McKelvey and Shirley Ann Somerville have already been using the structures that we've already got in place to make sure that we're not missing folk out, or that we're mindful not just to speak to the organisations or the paid professionals that are there to articulate on behalf of them, but to hear directly. So we've got Poverty Truth Commissions that we've engaged with. I met last week with the Poverty Alliance. It was Get Heard Scotland, their project, from different people from different parts of the country who have direct and lived experience of, in this case, poverty. Christina McKelvey's been engaging with people with disability organisations and people with direct experience of that as well. So something's just flashed up in my so we're trying to do what we can to make sure that we're engaging directly with people who have those experiences. And also, I'm an MSP who has my regular surgeries, and my constituents getting in touch with me as well. So with that hat on, we're getting a sense of what some of the difficulties are. But again, I think it'll be an important role for you to play to make sure that you're rooting through some of the things that you're hearing and understanding, and making sure that government are acting on that basis. And I think some of that's starting to be shown through with the recovery work as well, that the documents the First Minister's published, they're not solely focused on economic recovery. They're trying to kind of balance up a lot of the different harms that are there. So there's the COVID harm, but there's also the harms that have happened as a result of lockdown, the mental health, the problems with lack of education. And that's guided some of the things that we've done. So the 5 million to try and get people connected digitally, that might not have happened had it not been for the fact that we were listening to organisations like third sector organisations, the direct experience that we were hearing from people with lived experience. That possibly wouldn't have been an announcement that would have happened had it not been for the pandemic. So I'm trying to use these examples to show that we're trying to be agile ourselves to try and respond to need. But there's always more we can do, but I think we can do it better together. Oh. To coin a phrase.
It slipped out there. Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that that there are cabinet secretaries like yourself and others in government who are making a real effort to do that. I think it's quite disappointing that when you see the National Economic Recovery Group, for example, and some of the other groups, that they are quite great and good. And I know that they have reached out to some organisations like us and others, but I think it would be really good to have some sort of forum where those voices of lived experiences can be heard, and we will all do that, and our organisations will all do that, but that will feel like a bit of a cacophony. So if there's some way that could be more orchestrated in a more kind of cohesive way, I think that would be good, albeit understanding that everybody's lived experience is their own experience, and there's not a cohesive answer to that, and nor should there be. But I do worry about some of the kind of official groups that are being set up being very much kind of, well, not very innovative, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess, you know, that's a fair kind of comment to make, and we'll make sure that and Shirley Ann have made that, you know, it's probably easier for us and our portfolios to do these things, possibly, or it's much more, but we don't want that to be the default point to all the government has listened to because that bit of government has done it. So it has to be about it being across the board.
I think one of the things that struck me about that, for example, is that tourism will be and should be a real focus, but people will think about hotels, they'll think about pubs and restaurants and things, which is really important, but the third sector is really entrenched and integral to tourism as well. So, you know, arts organisations, cultural organisations, nature organisations, you know, from the National Trust to a wee tiny museum in Orkney or whatever, there's the sector's very much and community cafes, things like that's very much part of the tourism industry and what makes it special in Scotland. But that might get forgotten or left behind.
Well, I mean, we've kind of we kind of saw some of that through the third sector resilience funds. The big chunk going to health and social care, but a big chunk tourism and culture as well. And again, that's where we're having to kind of have those conversations at different parts of government to say, right, we've shored some of it up, but it's going to need to be a much more comprehensive set of actions, and making sure that they don't forget that there is a massive role that the third sector plays in those critical industries. And I guess as well, it's maybe difficult when social enterprise sits in this portfolio, but the economy's doing something different. So we need to make sure that we're joined up as well as we can be. And there's been some interesting, I think Kieran's on this as well, but I've seen some of his tweets of late showing at I can't remember now, it was something about recovery and agility of the social enterprise sector being much more kind of slightly easier to recover, possibly because of that agility. So there's benefit to make sure that we're joined up, and as a fair point, and we'll make sure we rectify that.
We're going to have to finish up soon, but I'm not sure if you saw the results of our polls. It seemed that around 3/4 of people here have said that their demand for their organisation has gone up, and slightly more than half are concerned about whether their organisation is going to survive the COVID crisis. So I think that's really interesting to go away and reflect on. But as we finish up, I'll just give you both an opportunity to sort of sum up, maybe by telling us a little bit about, you know, what positives perhaps you can take out from the last few months in terms of how you're going to approach work and life following this, and create the better society that we're all hoping is going to come out of this.
Yeah, I think the thing that has managed to sustain a lot of us as a government, as ministers, as individuals, has been seeing the way in which our communities have mobilised, the voluntary organisations, the third sector organisations, how they've managed to really drive forward an inordinate amount of good work and protected people, because essentially when this started, we said, or I said in my statement when we announced the funding, was that we wanted to keep people safe, warm and well and fed. And had it not been for the third sector, had it not been for our communities, then that would have been a much more difficult endeavour. So for going forward, the big lessons for me, that local works, that we have to trust our communities, that we have to work collaboratively, we have to disregard professional bureaucratic boundaries, and we have to focus in on the positive outcomes. So some of these things we already knew. They were set out in Christie 10 years ago. They've been set out long before as well, no doubt, in other documents that have been written. So while we probably all want to collectively write off 2020, next year will be the 10th anniversary of Christie. And so I think we need to also have a bit of confidence in the things that we were doing in the past, but maybe just quicken the pace, make sure that we work collaboratively, make sure that we recognise the need for fairness in our society. This has shown up where things have been found flawed and wanting, and actually we can deliver a lot of positive change if we work together at speed, at pace, with a focus on what's the best thing for the people and individuals in the communities that we serve. And if we can do that together, then I think we'll start creating the kind of fairer country that we want to see across the country. But in between times, it's going to be difficult and it's going to be tough, and it's going to have, I know somebody mentioned there that it's good to focus on the positives, but I'm under no illusions that in amongst all that, there's going to be some tough, horrible points when we're going to have pretty full, frank, honest and open discussions. And I think if we can have the good relationships now, then that will help us ease through some of that. I'm not going to pretend it's going to be easy, but I think the good relationships that we can have now, the focus on the positives, the focus on what's possible, will help us move forward with some of those more challenging points in time, which will no doubt come. But in amongst all that, thank you to everybody who's doing an inordinate amount of work. We know how hard you're all working, and we're in government are really appreciative of that.
Yeah, I'll just very quickly sort of sum up. But I think I agree with all of that, and I think what's been really impressive is how people have worked really collectively and collaboratively, and some of that is because some of the systems that drive competitive behaviour have been put in abeyance. So it would be quite good to learn a bit about that. And on a purely personal level, it's been really good reconnecting with kind of local sources of food, and dare I say it, wine. Because actually at the very beginning of this, I'm glad I was on mute because of my parcels of local food and wine arrived inevitably. But I do think there's something about that locality and the appreciating what you've got locally and working with local suppliers to really enjoy what's available in terms of produce as well as in terms of effort and people. And that kind of collective feeling that's seen a huge upsurge in volunteering. We need to hang on to that as well, because we're really conscious that not everyone that's put their hand up has been able to actually do any volunteering. So to really hold on to that as something that we can build on in the future as well, that's really, really encouraging.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think that's pretty much all we've got time for. So thank you very much, Aileen Campbell, Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Local Government, and Anna Fowlie, SCVO Chief Executive. And thank you for everybody who joined us and for submitting questions. I'm sorry we weren't able to get through to all of the questions, but we'll reflect over some of them, and hopefully in time everyone's questions will be answered. Thank you very much for joining us, and that's us for today.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.